Medals can mean many things. They may mean the completion of a task or the reward for competition. They are a symbol of pride and accomplishment. The highest award that a non-operational person or military figure not in the presence of an enemy can receive is the George Cross. On par with the Victoria Cross, which is only issued to military personnel, the George Cross recognises the individual or group on an incredible act of gallantry or bravery in the face of extreme danger. The medal was introduced in 1940 by King George, shortly after the climax of the Blitz. It was designed by Percy Metcalfe, and since its inception, 406 people and 3 groups have had the honour of collecting these awards as a personal thank you from the Queen and the nation. Of the 409, 6 have been awarded to railway personnel, and I am going to have the honour of sharing their stories. John Axon was born in 1900 in Stockport, Cheshire. He was at first apprenticed to be a painter and decorator at the age of 14, but shortly after his 19th birthday, he felt unfulfilled by his job and decided it was time for a career change. He left his job to start the job as a cleaner on the London and North Western Railway. As with many railway personnel in the early part of the 20th century, the rank of cleaner was important but not considered a high-ranking job. It allowed for John to learn the parts of the locomotive as he cleaned. Once he was proven and he passed the necessary qualifications, he worked up the ranks, eventually working on the footplate full-time as a fireman, then as a driver. He raised a family and worked happily on the railway up to and after the grouping and through the nationalisation of the railway in 1948. On the 9th of February 1957, John was driving the 11:05 freight train from Buxton to Warrington. It was a long train consisting of a Stanier Class 9F, 33 full wagons, and pulling a total train weight of 650 tonnes. John knew the track well, and he prepared to stop the train just before a steep descending gradient near Chapel in Frith in order to pin down the wagon's brakes when the brake steam pipe fractured. Instantly the cab was filled with scalding hot steam, and the train was in real danger of becoming a runaway. John was badly burnt, and he could have easily jumped from the cab, saving himself and leave the train to its fate, but John and his firemen, knowing of the risks, stayed at the controls. As the steam continued to spew all around them, they closed the regulator and applied the handbrake. The train then began to nosedive down the gradient. John pushed the fireman out of the cab, instructing him to pin down as many wagon brakes as he could. The fireman did what he could, but with the train hurtling down the hill at breakneck speed, there was nothing he could do further, and he jumped clear. John remained at the controls, with the guard, John Creamer, applying the brakes from behind, both refusing to budge, and they managed one warning wave to the signalman before the train ploughed into the back of another freight train, killing them instantly. In the inquiry, it was concluded that no one could have foreseen the pipe rupture, and there was no way that any party could have prevented it. Brake safety was modified so it wouldn't happen again. John posthumously received several awards for his effort to prevent the crash, and his wife and children collected his George Cross from the Queen on his behalf. Ben Gilbert and James Nightall were another recipients of the cross. Ben's start in the railway mirrored that of John, and he worked from the ground up on the Great Eastern Railway, fulfilling his dream to become an agent driver in July of 1942. In the meantime, he had become close friends with a local lad called James Nightall, who had risen to the ranks of firemen. The pair worked well together and were paired on many journeys. Ben and James's life would change forever on the night of the June 2nd, 1944. The world was deep in World War II, and the quickest way to get munitions to the front was by rail. The munitions were packed into long trains by the wives of the soldiers and were transported up and down the country to where the ships were waiting. Ben and James was on one such run and was just entering Soham Station. As they approached, Ben checked his train and noticed the wagon behind the engine was on fire. Acting quickly and knowing the dangerous cargo aboard, Ben and James took swift action. They stopped the train. They knew that if the whole train went up, the explosion would destroy the town and everyone in it. Ben instructed James to uncouple the burning wagon from the rest of the train. Ben complied, knowing full well the wagon could explode at any second. Once clear from the rest of the train, James joined Ben on the footplate to drive the burning wagon away from the train and the buildings surrounding it. As the engine and wagon passed the signal box, Ben made a desperate shout to the signalman to clear the line and stop any trains. At that moment, the bombs in the wagons exploded. The explosion destroyed all the station buildings and left a 20-foot crater in the tracks. 600 buildings in the surrounding area would need repair, but no one outside the station was killed. Ben would survive, albeit severely injured, but James and the signalman would not. Just 18 hours after the explosion, the line was reopened to freight and passenger services resumed the next day. Even the engine was returned to service and would run for a further 23 years. It wasn't really well known what caused the fire. Some say that cinders from the engine fell onto some sulphur powder that the wagon had been carrying on a previous run, but both men were recognised for their outstanding courage and putting themselves into life-threatening danger for the safety of those within the town. A memorial was placed in Soham and from their grateful residents, and Ben proudly showed his medal before passing away in 1976. Ben's medal is currently on display at the March Museum in Cambridgeshire. Norman Tuna also earned his George Cross in Second World War. A shunter by trade on the Great Western Railway, he was working as he normally would in the marshalling yards to Morpeth Dock when the air raid siren sounded. As the bombs from the air raid rained all around him, Tuna continued to work, with good reason. The goods train that it was just departing was laden with high explosive bombs destined for the Royal Air Force. When Norman had secured the cargo ready for departure, he found one wagon alight after being hit with an incendiary. Moving quickly, Norman helps the engine crew throw water onto the fire, but as he moved the sheet covering the bombs, one of the burning incendiaries fell inside the wagon between the bombs. Risking his own life, Norman climbed into the wagon and prized it out and threw it far away from the wagon. He then rejoined the engine's crew to bring the fire under control and bring the bombs back to a safe temperature. Norman's bravery under extreme conditions and prevented the dockyard from becoming nothing but a crater with massive loss of life. His cross remains with his family, but there are memorials at Woodside recognising his heroism. The predecessor to the George Cross, the Albert Medal, was awarded to Arthur Eccleshall. When the George Cross was created, recipients of the Albert Medal were invited to exchange them. However, Arthur never got the opportunity to exchange the medal, but his story is just as heroic. Albert was a porter working at Bushbury Station in 1908 when he saw 3 children making their way across a level crossing. The porter saw in the distance the unmistakable shape of an engine approaching them. Reacting quickly, he shouted to the children to get clear. 2 of the children cleared the tracks, but a little boy panicked and instead of running off the tracks, tried to run along the ballast between the platform and the rails in an effort to outrun the train. Arthur jumped off the platform and grabbed the child, lifting him clear. The train did hit Arthur, but miraculously he survived with just a knockout blow to the head. At the age of 19, he was the youngest ever recipient of the medal and lived happily after a successful career on the lines, working his way up to chief clerk. His medal was sold in 2013 at auction to an unknown buyer. Finally, and not least, we come to our last recipient. Wallis, or Wallis Oaks, once again joined the London, Midland and Scotland Railway at crew as a cleaner, once again rising through the ranks to driver after taking some time out for national service. On the 5th of June 1965, Oaks was driving a relief passenger service. The service was travelling about 60 miles an hour and was just outside of Crewe when the engine suffered a blowback. A blowback is when the fire and hot gases are blown into the cab through the firebox doors. Given the gases can reach thousands of degrees, the crew were in mortal danger, as well as the passengers on board the train. The fireman climbed out the window and reached the cab steps, where he managed to extinguish his burning clothes, but the heat prevented him from getting back into the cab. Fearing a runaway, he desperately tried to get back in. However, he could feel the train slow. Once the train had stopped, he managed to look into the cab and noticed the brakes had been applied, but there was no sign of Wally anywhere. He was found laying on the cutting after falling from the engine after it had come to a safe stop. A passing fireman concluded that Oaks had not only applied the brakes, but had opened the blower and partially shut the regulator in an attempt to get the engine to a safe, controlled stop and protect the passengers. Oaks sadly passed away from his injuries a week later, but his devotion to duty was a testament. Despite the funeral being well attended, Oaks' grave remained unmarked until 2017. When the announcement was made that the cross was due to be sold, Jeff Courtney began a campaign to give Wally the recognition he deserves. And on the 1st of February 2018, just as the cross went under the hammer, the headstone commemorating his bravery was placed. The National Railway Museum heard of the auction and raised thousands in an attempt to save the cross and the story for the nation. The sale of the cross reached fever pitch and sold for over £60,000, equaling the nameplate of the Golden Fleece, the most expensive piece of railway memorabilia to go under the hammer, and with the National Railway Museum snapping up the winning bid. Amazingly, the museum has paid less for some locomotives, but they couldn't risk a piece of history slipping into the hands of a private collector. Wally's medal sits at the entrance of the Search Engine Library overlooking the Great Hall. The museum also owns John Axon's medal, but it has yet to display this medal at this moment in time. Each of these men deserves our undivided respect, and if it wasn't for their acts of heroism and bravery, many more would have died. The world of the railway owes these men a great debt, and many engines have been named after them in their honour. If you're lucky enough to sit behind one of these engines, please pay a thought to its namesake and how their unwavering acts have helped shape and protect our country, its railways and its people.